Welcome. So this is the session called When Cities Set the Global Agenda, Financial Opportunity, and Climate Smart Economic Development. We'll use Detroit as a little bit of a case study, but we'll talk about other cities, both here in the US and around the world. Let me just quickly introduce our incredible panel. Carrie Dugan, she's the founder and CEO of Sustainability. She's also held multiple senior positions. She was Vice President Joe Biden's climate advisor and held other positions in the federal government. To her left, Matt Elliott. He's the president of Bank of America Michigan and the sustainability director. Mayor Donna Deegan from Jacksonville, the country's largest city by landmass. And to her left, Warren Evans. He's a special advisor for climate change to the Asian Development Bank. So let's start. As we said, we're going to use Detroit a little bit as a test case. Carrie, start with Detroit and talk a little bit about how the city went from crisis to a much more forward-footed position around economic development, with really green economic development being the focus.
Yeah, thanks for this conversation. I'll take any opportunity to talk about my city. There's no way you can cover in 2 minutes the history of Detroit, but the highlights or lowlights rather, several decades worth of disinvestment. Folks like my parents moving to the suburbs and vacating the city, leaving after a lot of blight, and I'm sure Matt can explain all what that meant for taxes and incomes and everything leaving the city. But what it really meant for people on the ground were things like 80,000 streetlights, half of which were off. So imagine if you're a kid growing up in Detroit or an elderly person just trying to get to your pharmacy and back. It presented a lot of dangerous outcomes, where I would hear stories about people having to decide whether they're going to walk on the sidewalk and get snatched up by somebody in a vacated house or risk getting run over by a car. Anyway, through a federal and state and city partnership, frankly, due to the crisis of the bankruptcy, we all got together. The foundation community, which is very, very strong in Detroit, and Matt will talk about the private sector as well. We came together as feds. We found a way to repurpose $300 million at the time and match that up with things that were already happening on the ground. So that partnership also led to the streetlight conversion. I was just telling a young lady, we had the largest streetlight conversion to LED in the country after Los Angeles. So that was a signal that Detroit could go from sort of the worst case scenario to world class, ahead of schedule and under budget. So if you haven't been, please come. We can unpack more later.
Great, thanks. And Matt, talk a little bit about, we always talk about multi-sectoral partnerships, public-private partnerships. We use those buzzwords a lot, but talk a little bit about what it meant in Detroit, what it continues to mean in Detroit, in the most practical ways.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for some of my Detroit friends who are doing the work on the ground being in the audience today. Maybe we can put in perspective the why climate in particular and sustainability generally are so important to us and so important to our future. If you look at the three largest industries that are in the state of Michigan, in order, they are auto manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. They're all squarely in the crosshairs of change, of climate change as well as technological change. You couple that with a population that's not growing, it's aging. You couple that with massive income inequality and lots of issues that we would refer to in this room as climate justice issues. And you say to yourself, okay, there's a lot to deal with here. And you layer on the fact that for years, Detroit didn't really have a functional government. And so into the breach comes lots of philanthropy, the private sector, et cetera. And what we've really done is basically you have a choice. Like you have the luxury of crisis. We talked about this the other day. Your choice set gets really narrow, okay? You can fold or you can lean into it. And we've really done our best to try to lean into it. And so some examples of that would be doing things like our major industries, really the automotive industry, disintermediating itself, right? So you can be disintermediated or you can do it to yourself and control it. And that's what we're trying to do. Along the way, do things like develop an innovation sector, which we never really had. We're now the fastest growing innovation hub in the United States. Surprise to a lot of people, right? And doing all that in a way, because we have this big income inequality issue that we were willing to talk about and deal with, doing it in a way that tries to bring people along through policy, bring people along through the private sector, because frankly we have to. We have a very low labor participation rate. We can't afford to leave people behind. And so, you know, I always talk about this a lot. We don't have that many options. If you want to grow, you want to win, these are things that we have to do. And one of the good things about Detroit, and I would imagine that the mayor of Jacksonville is going to have something similar to say here, we like to say that it's a big enough city to matter, but small enough where you can make a difference. And so we've been able to pull together and build relationships, and I'm just one of many people who's there at the table doing the work to pull it together. And so we've got some wins, but we have a long way to go. And I think, that's the story of the conference.
And I'm going to get to Jacksonville in a second, but Mayor, just begging your patience for one more moment. Let's go back to Carrie, and you've been on at least two sides of that partnership. You were fed at the height of the crisis, and now as a socially conscious business, a social business. What are the elements that go into the kind of environment that enables the kind of partnership that Matt was talking about?
Yeah, I'm doubling down on the innovation that's taking place in Detroit. It's innovative not just from a technological standpoint, but the way we approach things. It's absolutely through a lens of equitable access to the opportunity in the future. There are leaders in this room who lead that charge, and I hope you meet anybody here that's from Detroit, because they'll back me up on this. And that comes out of community engagement. There's such a raw realness. I know you all watch the NFL stuff, and you heard about our grit, and that's a thing, but it's really authentic and exciting. And I think we have that density that Matt described with innovation districts kind of pocketed around town, working on different, if it's technology or other things. And a community that just frankly really cares. It's a special place. I feel very lucky to be from there and to be able to, as Matt said, contribute in any way. The smallest little intervention can lead to a huge outcome in a place like Detroit. But I think the community engagement piece that it's led out of the mayor's office in particular, they have a very bold climate action plan, and that's informed by 27 neighborhoods coming out and him sitting down with it, his staff sitting down with it to explain this is what we want for our future in Detroit. So outcomes are things like this new greenway that we're getting, and I hear we're going to get some news on Florida. But it's a terribly exciting place to live, and I do live in the city, by the way. I get asked all the time, yeah, where do you live? Whatever. I live in Detroit proper, and I'm raising my kids there, and it's wonderful.
Great. So Mayor, you're in some ways you're relatively new. Jacksonville is a real rising star in the climate scene. Published a really amazing resilience strategy. You talked about that a little bit at the plenary yesterday, but it is really the substance really backs up the hype in some ways. But talk about what you could learn and should learn from cities like Detroit, who have been thinking about this now for a decade or more, and maybe are out in front a little bit. Talk about how you might both learn and teach Detroit.
Well, I think the way that Detroit has approached resilience and approached the green economy is something that we can certainly learn from, because you said some of the things that we see in Jacksonville all the time. When I came into the mayor's office, one of the things that I talked about repeatedly was, we are the largest city by area, but we're also the largest city. We have over 1 million people because the city and the county are the same. But when we consolidated 50 years ago, the underserved portions of our community, who were largely black and brown, were told, hey, if you'll consolidate the city, this is an old story, right? Then we'll make sure you get taken care of. Well, they didn't. Infrastructure crumbled. The city was falling apart. We're mostly a city of water. And so we made concerted efforts to start to rebuild those areas, that green infrastructure. So I think reaching out to the community, engaging them in a climate action plan, mapping our greenhouse gases, all those things. We have a very young city. 36 is our average age in Jacksonville, so different than Detroit that way. But engaging the community was a very big piece, and I know that you did the same thing. Also, we have folks like Shad Khan, who owns the Jaguars, who's investing $500 million in our Riverfront. That's going to be a very resilient project. I know you've had a lot of investment in your city from folks like that. So I think it's very important to engage the community, but also the business community, and that's what we've done. We have really. I think we are really poised to be a climate leader in a city that, frankly, 5 or 10 years ago didn't even want to talk about that issue.
Yeah, and on this theme of how do we engage public, private, nonprofit, the three sectors of society, Mayor, what are the things that you want to see from the business sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector? What makes them good partners when they come to the table with you?
Well, they're great partners because they understand how much money is involved here. Honestly, we all understand together that if we start talking about the green economy as an opportunity instead of as some sort of a doom and gloom scenario for cities, that we can go a long way toward that. So our business community understands that. We were talking earlier that we've partnered with Bank of America to be a lead city. We're going to start working on that starting in April. But I talked about Mr. Khan, but we have so many business entities and nonprofits. Can I share my news?
Yes.
Because this is really wonderful news. But it started with a nonprofit entity called Groundwork Jacksonville that started raising money for a 30-mile green belt around the city called the Emerald Trail. And they raised a lot of money, and we have gone very, very aggressively after federal grants. And we found out yesterday that we're getting a $147 million grant from DOT to complete our greenway. So now a project that would have taken more than 10 years at the rate at which we have funded it will be done in less than 5, and that's really fantastic for our city, which will also connect to our riverfront, which we're also redoing, and it's our business community is very involved in those efforts.
Yeah. Warren, turning to you, you see a little bit of lots of different cities across Asia, some of the world's biggest cities, some of the world's fastest growing cities. Tell us a little bit about how they're approaching this question of climate smart development, climate resilience.
Sure. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. Just, I realize not everybody knows Asian Development Bank. If you know the World Bank, we're the World Bank for Asia and Pacific. We're owned by governments. U.S. and Japan are the biggest shareholders. We do about $30 billion a year in development finance to support developing countries. We have 70 cities over 1 million population. We have 13 over 10 million. So we have some big cities. Most of them are coastal, particularly the largest cities like Mumbai, where Michael used to live. And they face issues that are very common to Florida. So from a climate change point of view, increased frequency and intensity of storms, storm surge, flooding, et cetera, et cetera. So those cities are understandably primarily concerned with building resilience to climate impacts. But at the same time, most of them are, some of them are in high-emitting countries, so they're very keen on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Most of them that are not high emitters have some of the worst air pollution in the world, so they're very keen on shifting to clean transportation, in particular, e-mobility, because that's the largest source of air emissions. So we stand to learn a lot from cities like Detroit and Jacksonville. Those cities stand to learn a lot, and that's why we're having discussions with Detroit on developing a partnership to learn the lessons. I think there's the key challenge that they have is they're already under-infrastructured. And so it's even without climate change, there are trillions of dollars needed to invest in them. So the key challenge is how do you mobilize the resources, do it right, get the kind of governance that's required to actually make it work in an equitable manner, and that's what we work on. Again, I think there's a lot we can learn from each other, and very happy to be here. I'm going to circle back on Detroit later on. Thanks.
Great. Well, let's come back to Detroit now, and Carrie, talk a little bit about, okay, so we've had a decade of progress. Feels like there's some tailwinds here. But what do you think the next 5 or 10 years, both in terms of the opportunities, but what are going to be the challenges when you think about Detroit over the next 5 or 10 years, developing a more sustainable economy?
That's a great question. I think what's in front of us right now is still a lot of blocking and tackling. It has been a darling story. It's been fun to watch us on the news.
Yeah.
But the truth is we still do have a lot of blight. So this mayor, he's Mayor Duggan and I'm Dugan, so we're all clear. I'm not related to Uncle Mike. He has taken a look at what the opportunity is right in front of us. We also have a huge city, 139 square miles, and a lot of vacant land and blight. So we focused money from HUD a few years ago to take down blighted land, and now we're going back out, and the city did these, like I said, 27 communities were engaged in the idea of putting solar, purposing solar out on their vacant land in exchange for some community benefits, and I mean significant community benefits, things like weatherization and so on. So I'm actually on faculty at University of Michigan, Go Blue, another good football team. And it's what is doubling down on what Matt said. It's a place where I could get my students in to help with their subject matter expertise, help the city do these kinds of programs. So solar is one opportunity, but we also have issues like, we're in a city, so we have heat issues in vulnerable communities. So the mayor is taking a look at that. What's the role of technology in these spaces? What's the role of new technology in these spaces? And trying to double down on the neighborhoods that have committed themselves to this future. Those are the ones that are going to get these benefits. So making yourself on the path of least resistance and being willing to step up and tell the city, and you have a receptive team, I think that's the recipe right now.
Yeah. And Matt, what do you think from the private sector? How are you thinking about leveraging the success that you've had over the longer term?
I think one of the things that Warren said earlier is really important is this idea of mobilization of capital, right? So if we're going to transition the economy global, we've got to mobilize about $200 trillion of capital, which means there has to be a return. Which, in the state of Michigan and in Detroit in particular, actually there's some really good raw material and opportunity to make that happen. So for example, there's 3 or 4 things that we need to get right if we're going to be successful over the next 4 or 5 years. One of them is demographic. We have to really work on this idea of labor force participation, training up our labor force to be able to handle these more knowledge economy jobs, especially people of color. That's one. The second one is we've got to get the electrification and the transition of that economy correct, which is really, really tough because, think about it. We've got a couple of firms in our city that are over 100 years old who on the one hand are trying to shrink one piece and grow the other. That is really tough to do. But then we've got a lot of opportunity to make that happen, right? So we've got lots of opportunity from the green economy. We think of ourselves as the scale-up state. Like if you have an idea, that's great. But if you actually want to make something, we have more degreed engineers in mechanical engineering than any place in the country. We can make it, right? And so these are the building blocks that, when we look at an opportunity at Bank of America, we want to lean into and invest, for example, in the automotive industry. We've raised more capital for automotive than any firm in the country since the financial crisis. And a lot of that has happened with the work we've done on the ground in Michigan. So that's an example. But so we see lots of opportunities for us to lean into there because the raw material and the building blocks are there. And the last thing I'll say is that the mayor, leadership really matters. And we've got some great leaders and have had some great leaders in the state and in the city. He's fantastic. Yeah. One of the things that we've really started to focus on is population growth. When you go into his cabinet room, which is really a war room, there are, Trish knows this, there's a real-time series of whiteboards that have that week's stats. So when I go in there, he always walks me over to, this is how many mortgages that were made last year and so far year to date in the city, how many are yours? Like that's the level of accountability he gets to. And that's how we get things done.
Yeah. Mayor, excuse me.
I know
Mayor,
you're going to steal that one from him, right?
Talk a little bit about your incredible messenger. You are, in some ways, like Michigan, and much of the United States, really, in a little bit of red, little bit of blue, lots of purple geography. How do you think about messaging climate smart development in a way that's going to resonate and have longevity in such a mixed place?
Well, I find that really the only way to do that without setting off political buzzwords that can be offensive to some people, right, is to always make the business argument. And that's not just true of climate, it's true of just about everything, right? If you can make the business argument and show where the dollars and cents line up and how much money it can bring back to your city. Yeah. In so many ways, because of the workforce that we have in Jacksonville, because of the Navy, we are set up perfectly to establish a green infrastructure in our city. The return for us really is going to be huge. We're just right here on something. We haven't electrified our fleets yet. We haven't begun to electrify our fleets yet. That's one of our goals. But we can go in and we can show the city council that's going to save us $46 million if we will move to an electrified fleet. I think if you can make those business arguments where you can really show both the politics of it and the business community, this is the return. I think that's the way to make those arguments.
Yeah. I will come back. I want to put a pin in that because I want to come back to all of us and ask what are the next frontiers in terms of making those business arguments, because I'm very interested in, like, the switching out traditional streetlights for LEDs. Like, that math is simple, which is why you all did it really quickly, and it's a great story. But
that
it's
was not easy, though.
No, it was not easy. I'm not trying to belittle that, but it's a relatively simple for a more holistic transition. There's a question of what next do we need to measure? How do we put that into the kinds of financial products that can capture that value and what that means? So, and let's stay on that, and then Warren, I want you to talk a little bit about some of the stars in Asia and what you're seeing there.
Gosh, I'm not trying to be an academic in any way, but I think about things in sort of, the carbon buckets. And, every place is going to have some unique features to be able to address things. We have a lot of aged built environment. There's a lot of opportunity in Detroit. And by the way, we have some of the best architecture in the world, so another reason to come and check it out. But a lot of inefficient buildings. And I'll throw a bone to Carla Walker-Miller, who's in the audience. One of our real challenges is that even when we've got great federal investment coming out the door for things like weatherization, 75% of the time when a worker shows up at a door in Detroit, they're turned away. They're not even allowed to go into the house to do the work because of pre-existing issues around asbestos, mold, there's no roof on the house, et cetera. So I don't want to make light that everything's perfect. We have real challenges ahead of us. And Katie McGinty's at this conference, so she'll also give me a high five for talking about energy efficiency, but there are some really basic things we need to do to make the livability of Detroit for everybody. And then I think about the grand challenges. I'm an advisor to the Secretary of Energy. We have a lot of earth shots, and we're sending funds around the country and different opportunities and hubs, hydrogen hubs and things like that. I got out of the business of predicting winners in 2016, roughly. But I work with a pretty large portfolio of climate tech. So I'm not going to point you in one direction or another. I just think the innovative community in Detroit and in other places around the country is so fun to watch. And if you're not participating in that, even as your side hustle, which is what we do in Detroit, you need to get involved.
Great. And just to call out, there's a South Florida Tech Hub, and then there's a few folks from South Florida Tech Hub who are in the audience as well. So that's something that's on the mayor of Miami-Dade. Hello, Mayor. So Matt, go to you. What do you think we need to measure in order to take the next leap? Like, where's the gap in innovation in terms of measurement to get us to the place we need to get to make the business argument that the mayor was talking about?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to think about this. When we talk to clients, I mean, the majority of what I do for Bank of America is I have the privilege of leading sustainability for our commercial bank. And so what we're doing is we're talking to companies that are right now beginning a journey. And there's 3 stages in that journey that I think are applicable even to a city. So the first one is just acknowledgement or awareness. This is a thing, that it's an issue, it's an opportunity and a risk. I need to deal with it. The second one is prioritization. Where does this rank order in the list of all of the things that I have to deal with as a business owner or as a mayor? And then the third one is implementation. Okay, we're going to start making some steps here. We're going to start putting money to work. In order to make that step from 2 to 3, that's where measurement comes in, because what gets measured gets done. So now it depends on what are you measuring and in what context. So if you're a company, You're going to measure emissions because you need, if you're one of my clients, one of our clients, you're probably a supplier to, say, a General Motors or Ford. And so you need to demonstrate that you are going to be able to decarbonize your business. My son works in automotive. He got a bid package the other day from one of these automotive requirements that or companies that's requiring him to calculate embodied carbon in the part that will be made in 2028. Okay? That's a real thing. Now, if you're a city, then you have to also measure, I think, the things that are the markers of your success. And to the mayor's point, we're going to, the person on the street is going to really embrace this when they see that it works for them. The mayor of Detroit, his fundamental metric is population. People vote with their feet. If you want to live in Detroit and your population's growing, you're doing something right. That's his point of view. Our governor has adopted the exact same concept. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think the metrics depend on what outcome you're trying to drive, but certainly measurement, it just fundamentally is critical. But it's going to depend on your context and what problem you're trying to solve.
Mayor, additional thoughts or any innovation around measurement that you want to share?
Well, look, we just established a climate plan, but also we mapped all of our greenhouse gas sources in the city. I think that's really important. But I can't stress enough the education piece, and you really touched on that. It's cheap to educate your population. We've done that around a number of different issues. But when you can take it down to the street level, and I think that the compound flood model that we talked about last night is one of the ways in which we can do that. Take it down to the street level to tell people what things mean for them and how this will impact their lives. The more that you can make this personal for people, the more it's about those personal stories of how this affects each person in your city. Those are the things that you want to take out and share and educate people with. Because if you can't make people care up here. You can only make them care down here where it matters to their lives. And we're spending a lot of intentional time doing that.
Yeah. Warren, putting your ADB hat on, which you came with actually, but putting your ADB hat on and as a organization that provides massive technical assistance as well as loans to countries and subnationals around climate, both mitigation and adaptation. What are just staying on this measurement theme, what are some of the key performance indicators that you've seen the bank and the client agree on? What are some of those key? I know I'm talking about across a wide range of sectors and a wide range of projects, but talk a little bit about how you see the measurement as being key in terms of your business.
Well, on the mitigation side, it's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. It's GHG reductions are avoided. And that's, international standards on that. We follow that. The multilateral development banks collectively have agreed upon methodologies for how we're aligned with the Paris Agreement and things like that. So that side is pretty straightforward and easy. So we measure in dollars out and GHG emissions reduced. The adaptation side or climate resilience side is really tough,
right?
And we're not there yet. Eventually it will be. For example, we just launched a new. Carrie was talking about heat. We just launched a new heat and gender and heat resilience program because women and children, particularly in poor communities, vulnerable communities, are by far the most vulnerable to this dramatic increase in heat waves that we're all experiencing. And there it would be lives saved. It would be access to water, easy access to water. It's we've looked at the key performance indicators, and there's about 280 of them, which is way too much to have a good to have a good job of having metrics to measure what you're doing. So that on the adaptation side is work in progress, and I think we're a ways away from having that figured out. So what do? Dollars.
Yeah.
It's the dollars that we put into adaptation.
Okay. And talk a little bit about, staying with you, Warren, talk a little bit about who are the stars in Asia that we should be looking to in terms of, they will not have figured it all out. Asian cities are incredibly messy, as are cities in, all around the world. And of course, climate, both shocks and stresses, is exacerbating that. But maybe just speak to where you've seen some of the innovation happen across the region.
Well, part of it is city and part of it's national. So I'm gonna mention two things that are the reasons that we're talking to Detroit and the state of Michigan. We have what we call the Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM, which is essentially where we take concessional finance, our soft money, philanthropic money, donor money, the climate funds money, like climate investment funds, combine that with commercial money, and very happy that last week BOA indicated they were interested in joining this, and essentially refinancing coal-fired power plants. Those coal-fired, and Indonesia is the first country. We'll do this in high-emitting countries: Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, maybe Kazakhstan, and so by refinancing them, we bring down the cost of capital, and we can then shut down the coal-fired power plant early. That is going to then, and replace that with renewable energy. That will really show what just transition means. And just transition is a big part of our work. Michigan, Detroit, has done a remarkable job of just transition for people who lost their jobs, communities and businesses that lost their jobs because of the transition from conventional, my car to the new car. And so we have a lot to learn. There are about 2 good case studies in the world, Michigan and Ireland, on this. The second one in coming to so that's a national level and private sector initiative. And if it works, it will be the largest GHG emission reduction program the world has seen up to now. There's a big if there. The second one is Bangkok. And Bangkok has, if you've been to Bangkok, you know how bad the air quality is. 60% of that is from vehicular, from mobile sources. They're investing, private sector and government are investing huge in moving towards e-mobility. So we just approved a loan 2 months ago for e-tuk-tuks and battery power generation. We did a loan last year for e-ferries. So when you go there and you ride the riverboats, those will be E, and then a very large e-bus program. So I think Bangkok on the e-mobility side is the sort of the poster child for our region.
And we know that the Thai government sort of waxes and wanes in terms of parties. How are you mitigating against political risk there?
On this, it's fairly low because it is at the city level.
Right.
And the governor of Bangkok really doesn't care that much about the national government. It's its own world. And so we haven't had an issue there. And that's one of the reasons it's a success story, is because the governance has improved consistently over the last 3 governors.
Great. I want to go back to this question of just transition and learning from Michigan. So, Carrie, I'll throw this out to both Carrie and Matt. Talk a little bit about how you've approached just transition in Detroit. And if we can get specific about stuff that's worked and hasn't worked, I think that would be really useful.
Well, there's Detroit and there's Michigan, and one of the other activities I've been involved in is the Governor's Council on Climate Solutions, which, if I got this right, mentions equity 19 times, right, Carl? 17, 16? Yeah. So I would say it's taken really, really seriously, and I think I already emphasized that in the city itself. But it shows up in how we go about everything in Detroit. We have charter-mandated community meetings that are all around the city. And like Matt, I've been in the cabinet room and seen the metrics boards and spreadsheets. And it's very, very intense. But the community engagement piece is underpinning everything. The mayor is really, really committed to showing up in people's basements and in the community and answering their questions, which takes me back to when I was embedded in City Hall. So you mentioned I was a Fed. They called us the Federales because we were embedded in City Hall. I don't know who came up with that. I was there originally from the Department of Energy, and it was mentioned to Matt earlier, that experience, I spent 6.5 years in some fashion embedded in City Hall, either from Department of Energy or the White House. And I thought that experience really certainly made me a better federal person, because I could see not one size fits all. And part of that to me is being just, really recognizing that every community is not the same and has different challenges that you just don't know. I always say this, and you can laugh at me or not, but DC does not have a monopoly on all the good ideas. There's some really fresh thinking out there, turns out.
What?
I know. But here's what I left with, and this is the main thing I wanted to share with you, is the approach that we left with, informed by the work in Detroit, was listen first and listen sincerely, not transactionally, for what the community wants. So I played basketball a million years ago, so this is a line I always use, the give and go. Anybody know what I'm talking about? So you have to give the ball away to get the ball back to make the basket. That's what I mean by listening intently. They might ask you for something that has nothing to do with what you're selling, but you are responsive and you go and find it and you start building trust. Nothing replaces being on the ground. So listen, then provide that technical assistance that we've all been talking about ad nauseum, and subject matter expertise through capacity. So I was embedded in City Hall. That's just one example. We talked a lot about that this afternoon in a session I was in. And then you send the resources, because if there's not a person on the receiving end of the money, that you're not helping anybody. And then the last thing I would say is we learn to celebrate the victories with them. It is a really exciting thing to see your projects come to life. To me, that's a just approach to the entire transition.
Is there anything from that whole experience that, when looking back, you're like, you know what? I'm sure there are many things, but give us one thing that you look back and think,
I'm looking at Carla. The O'Shea Solar Park. So part of the recipe from Department of Energy that I would use is I'd bring in peers from other cities. I'd bring in technical assistance from the national laboratories. Please visit the national laboratory if you don't know what I'm talking about. And we were really smart coming from Washington, so we said, let's do an urban solar park and everyone will love us. Well, that didn't go so great. That was an example of community engagement gone sideways, because the community who surrounded this solar field did not actually get a benefit. And so we've been trying to patch that one back up together. So that's definitely one that sticks out for me in my heart, like we could have done a much better job there.
great.
When I think about the missed opportunities, or I think about things we would have liked to mulligan on, it really comes down to, boy, we could have done so much better, right? We scored, a field goal, we should have made a touchdown, right? And almost always that's because dichotomous thinking won out over and thinking. So a lot of people have this false belief that I can do equity or I can do maximum economic development. I think we're starting to demonstrate the fact that if you want to do it right over the long term, it has to be an and, right? Yeah. And when we think about the biggest wins that we've had that are self-sustaining, where the flywheel is turning, that's actually been the case. That's frankly the way that we at B of A operate as well. We talk about profits and purpose, and that helps us guide ourselves over a long period of time. And I personally see that starting to play out a little bit more in Detroit.
Great. I have a question for the mayor, but I want to tee everyone up that this might be the last question I'm going to ask, and then we're going to pass the mic and see if people have questions they want to ask. So, Mayor, when you think about the opportunity, we've heard process and ways in which we act here from our friends in Detroit. How do you think about maximizing the opportunity that's now? Because there is an incredible opportunity. You've just taken advantage of it with a really great DOT grant. But talk about how you see this moment in time and how you're thinking about taking advantage of that opportunity to have the most impact for the citizens of Jacksonville.
Well, I think one of the really great things about having ignored these problems for so long is that we have a pretty blank landscape in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so we've had the opportunity to really build from the ground up, and there are a lot of stakeholders there, and perhaps it might surprise you to learn that one of the communities that has been really the most engaged in the business community has been our development community, because our major focus right now is on the downtown and on those connected neighborhoods around downtown, those older urban neighborhoods that have been neglected. Right. And I think we have made the argument very effectively with the business community that if we want the key in the ignition here, you've got to engage. And frankly, because we're a city built on water, let's maximize that. Let's let that be our strength, and at the same time, let it not be our Achilles heel, as I said last night. And the development community seems to be very bought in. So I think for us, what you're seeing now is really a transformation of, and we're right here. So I think as long as we continue those relationships, especially with our business partners and stakeholders, I think you're going to see a very different Jacksonville. Hopefully we'll follow in the footsteps of our friends in Detroit and see a whole lot of positive change.
Yeah. And I do think as someone who's seen transitions and moments in time in cities around the world, just this incredible partnership between the private sector, civil society, and government. Private sector and civil society can really be the glue that keeps things going through political transitions and really accomplishes long-term change. So I think that's a really smart way to approach it. So we're going to go to questions now. I saw this hand right here. And I'm ending this formal part a little early, so we got time, folks. So let's get in a true multi-directional kind of conversation.
Yes. Hello. Thank you so much for this conversation today. Thoroughly enjoyed it, specifically the conversation on just transition and the importance of collaboration. So I have a question for the mayor, but I would love to hear from all the panelists. When you think about the energy transition, we talk a lot about green economy. But Jacksonville sitting on water, I'm curious how you manage and balance also looking at blue economy. So thinking about proper use of the ocean's resources, preservation of the ecosystems, and also thinking about fresh water, right? So conservation of fresh water, as we know that is vital for life on Earth. So balancing blue economy, green economy as we think about the global transition.
Well, I don't really think of them as separate, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, we have a St. John's River management district in Jacksonville that we partner with on the health of our river, which is getting better and better. But in all of the things that we are planning in terms of resilience, those are also things that increase the health of our river. The grasses that we want to plant, the setbacks for our development, all those things will help in the health of our river. So I don't think they're separate. They're all part of the same discussions for us, and I think that we have 1,500 miles of shoreline in Jacksonville, 850 square miles. So it's a lot of water and a lot of ecosystem to protect, and we have 80,000 parks in Jacksonville. I mean, it's a lot. So that's a top priority for us as we're planning this green technology. But to me, it's all married together. We're talking about all of it together.
There's a lot of similarities there between Jacksonville and the Great Lakes. I mean, Michigan touches 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. It's the majority of the fresh water in the Western Hemisphere, the largest body of fresh water on Earth. And I would say that especially people who have lived there most of their lives, like myself, I literally have not lived more than 60 miles away from a Great Lake my entire life. And people get really connected to the water, you care about it, but it's also a very, very vulnerable resource. The good news about all that is that there's a lot of time and money being invested in the public sector as well as the private sector to solve water quality issues because it's so top of mind for people, in and around Michigan. So I think you said it, you can't solve these problems up here, you've got to solve them down here. People have to be engaged viscerally around some of these issues, and I'd say if you talk to any Michigander and you talk about water, it's visceral. There's one other thing that's really interesting too, which is the governance around the Great Lakes is very unique. So there are a lot of people around the country, usually west of here, who I think once in a while say, hey, we'll just run a pipeline up to Lake Michigan, we'll be good. It's never gonna happen, okay? And the reason is that all the decisions around what the use of that watershed are made by the states that touch the Great Lakes and the Premier of Ontario. So good luck, right, with that. But what's cool about that is that these are the entities that touch it are responsible for it, for the health of it, and that therefore they also get to govern it. And I think that has that sort of just transition writ large, and it has, in my view, a really big analog to how things have to work at the neighborhood level too.
Yeah, there are very few climate or resilience stories that don't have a messy governance overlay anywhere in the world. And Carrie, you want to say something about Michigan? I want Maureen to talk a little bit about Chennai too, right?
Yeah, everything Matt said is absolutely true about how Michiganders feel about water. But something that struck me when I moved back there several years ago, there's a gentleman named Mark Wallace who's heading up our Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. Google it. And the first lunch I had with him, he's like, I said, I'm so impressed what you're doing. It's now the 3 years in a row, #1 river walk in the country. It's fantastic. I live on it. It is amazing. But what he told me those years ago was that, there's kids in Detroit that don't even know there's a river. They don't know there's an international bridge. And that just really struck me, because it's hard to care or give a shit about something you never see or touch or feel. And so I'm very blessed. I live on the Detroit River, and I split my time between Traverse City, Lake Michigan, and Lake Superior. And you can do that when you all move to Michigan. So.
Warren.
So the largest increase in demand that we have from cities now is for nature-based solutions. There's a recognition that if they don't, and you're coming back to your point on saving money, that investing in coastal ecosystems is the smartest thing I can do to build resilience for climate impacts in the cities. Chennai we have a major urban program there. It's about $400 million. A big chunk of that is to restore all the wetlands around Chennai to serve as flood retention. So it's happening as we speak because climate impacts are happening as we speak.
Yeah. Chennai is a South Indian city with a massive population, probably 10 million, in a similar subtropical climate like Miami. Next question. I saw Sammer.
Thank you all. I'm Sam Risley with the Mayor's Migration Council. A lot of cities are growing, and they're growing a lot of times with people who are coming to these cities who are coming from different backgrounds and are low income. And so talking about the just transition and tying that specifically to green jobs, we work with a lot of cities who are doing good work on green jobs, but not inclusive green jobs in terms of making sure that those jobs work for low income and sometimes new communities. So I'm curious, first, if there's a common definition that you use, either from the American perspective or the Asian perspective, what is a green job? And then, is a tuk-tuk driver a green job, for example? And what are some specific examples that you're seeing from cities' perspective specifically to create more inclusive green jobs within those local economies?
Well, I'll go first. I don't use the term green jobs anymore. That's also something I gave up around the 2016 time period. But I truly believe it's the whole economy. So it's every job in some fashion is going to be wrestling with carbon in some fashion. So just skip all that. It's the whole economy, stupid, right? Second, I'm very proud to live in a city that takes immigrants with open arms. I spent a bunch of time on the census, and we were extremely intentional about finding nodes in all sorts of communities. We've got a Bangla town, we've got a Mexican town, we've got a wonderful bouquet of people in Detroit and in Metro Detroit. I'm sure you're reading about it in the press right now. But it is every job. And I look again, tying back to what Matt said at the beginning, like the innovation districts we have, my team offices out of a place called New Lab, which you may have heard of. And that and the Riverwalk and Henry Ford College, I'm thinking of all these places we have. They're so incredibly diverse and powerful. So we do have that in Michigan. We're really lucky in that way, but it is every job. And I'll let Matt piggyback on that.
You can't. It's hard to be what you can't see. I had this conversation with a woman right behind you last night who created an event last year to welcome Black and brown entrepreneurs into the green economy opportunity. Because sometimes people get the overt or implicit message that, well, that's not for you, right? And so it was an incredible 2 days of incredible speakers. I was the warm-up speaker for the lieutenant governor. The governor was there the day before. We had the mayor. Carla just did an amazing job. But I think being really intentional about that, being very, very specific about, hey, this is for you, this is for everybody, and being clear about the why behind it, meaning that we need you to be successful so we can collectively be successful. Those were some of the key underlying messages, and I think that's why you're going to do another event next year, right, Carla?
It's called Recess, Recess 2024.
We have one of the most diverse cities in America. People come and study Jacksonville all the time because we're just truly a mosaic of people from all over the place. And in fact, as far as Florida is concerned, we're sort of becoming the toothpaste tube as everything gets crowded. You roll it up and everybody's coming to Jacksonville. We're going to gain about 700,000 people in the next 50 years. So how we can attract those people and offer them opportunities is going to be very, very important. And some of those opportunities, you don't have to have a big college degree to do some of those jobs, but they're very well paying. So I think for us, that's a really good news story.
Yeah. Next question. 1, 2, 3. We still got a little time, people. So we'll try to keep it moving.
Hi, thank you for your time today. I'm here from El Paso, Texas, who's currently developing their climate action plan. And so one question is, what advice would you give a city that's kind of developing that plan? And the second is, I help people look at rooftop solar. We're an installer, a residential solar installer. In El Paso, we have one utility. It's a monopoly, El Paso Electric. They're owned by J.P. Morgan Chase's Infrastructure Investment Fund. And they really stifle development of solar. They charge you a minimum bill of $30 when you put solar panels on. And so I guess, looking at the levers of power available, it seems like very few, maybe city council getting on board. Just any advice you'd have on dealing with that kind of Goliath?
I can hop in.
Yeah, I wish you would.
The National Renewable Energy Lab. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a DOE national lab. Oh my gosh, you guys, I know you like the national parks. Google the national labs. There's 17 of them. The National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado has an awful lot of resources for you, including best practices from communities that have faced the same challenges you have. And they put out reports. They worked with LA and did a report called LA 100. They've done a Puerto Rico 100. I strongly encourage you to make use of those resources that are, they're quasi-governmental. It's Department of Energy's lab, so you're already paying for it. So make the call.
The one thing I would say about doing the climate action strategy is that we're finding more and more, and you heard a little bit of echoes of this up here, is that the how you do the thing is as important as the what you do. And so the document is great, but you leverage the document as a way of doing engagement, of asking big questions, of being able to reach out to other cities, of being more inclusive, more community-led. All of those things are possible because you're going through this strategy process, which ultimately will be great, and the mayor will be able to say, this is it, and then it will be outdated, and So I think that's the promise of doing a strategy, is thinking about both the how we act is as important as the what we do.
And there are a lot of civil society organizations like the one you started that are there to help, and particularly now on heat. There's a lot of new free advice available.
So my question is
Wait.
similar to his.
You gotta.
Hello, thank you. Christian, I'm with the city of Miami Beach. Similar to his, as far as strategy goes, I want to reference a talk that happened yesterday when climate projects meet private capital. Maybe you can help me understand, because I wasn't clear on it yesterday, how the runway kind of looked for these projects like the LED street light, companies that were likely had private capital funding that were going to do the installs. Did it come in the shape of policy that eventually said every street light in the city is going to be an LED light? I want to know, as far as working for the local government, how we actually make those things happen, because I wasn't sure after yesterday.
Well, this is going to be a pretty big chapter in the book I'm writing, that experience, but there's some features that you should be aware of if you are a municipal leader. If you own your streetlight system, for example, then you have a lot more control about what happens. If the utility owns it, you have less control. In Detroit's case, they owned their streetlights, and that was a huge benefit. The city was well on its way into bankruptcy, like we all saw that sort of coming, and the legislature set up a public lighting authority, so it was a separate legal entity where resources could live, and there'd be some staff capacity. Backing up a step, when I first called the city, the head of the public lighting authority, and said, hey, I'm Carrie from the Department of Energy and I'm here to help. They're like, yeah, just give me some greenbacks. And I'm like, nah, that's not what I do. I don't walk around with a federal checkbook. So I did apply that recipe that I was kind of saying before of just, he said he needs greenbacks, so I brought in the chief financial guy for the secretary at the time. and did a lot of peer-to-peer learning and brought the secretary in and brought the labs in. So it's not like it was a magic thing. By the way, this is at a time when LEDs weren't on the tip of everyone's tongue. Do you guys remember there was a time before y'all knew about LEDs, right? So I was back in Washington at DOE trying to drive down the cost curve of the LED technologies while deploying it in a city heading into bankruptcy. It was not easy, okay? I had to take a lot of convincing, a lot of dangling secretaries in front of people. But it worked. You know, I brought the labs in to show the technical and financial feasibility of doing this conversion. And they did it ahead of schedule and under budget. But the key feature is really that the city owned their infrastructure.
Anything else? Next.
Hi, my name is Susie Jaramillo, and I'm from Encantos. We create stories with purpose inspired by culture, and we're actually working with the City of Miami Beach and Gloria Estefan and the Aspen Institute to bring to life content that specifically showcases what cities are doing and what, you know, the cool jobs out there that kids don't know about. And so I know you guys run cities, so I'm assuming you have a lot of expenses. But to that, is there a place where like you care about sort of like funding for kids and for content and, you know, to get the word out there to ease some of that climate anxiety with some of the actions that they can take and some of the things that they can look forward to?
I think anytime you can engage kids, we do that in everything we do pretty much in the mayor's office. We try to engage the kids and bring them into the process. So but to me, I don't know that they're so much anxious. I think it's sort of like a literacy initiative that we're doing. You want to make it fun. You don't want to make it sound like work. So if they feel like they're being heroes or they're doing something that's good or they can be a part of something, make it a fun process for them. I think our young people are pretty motivated on this issue. And so I think, you know, it helps to have some passionate people around you. We have a great team that is working on that. But we always message to children because we feel like they're the ones that we're doing this for and they need to be engaged. But you can't do it with data. It's got to be fun.
I think also providing some level of exposure to what it's really like. I've spent most of my career supporting manufacturing companies, and manufacturing for a long time has had a dirty word. People didn't want to do it. They were supposed to go to college and take on a lot of debt. Whereas you can walk into a manufacturing facility and really have a nice career. Okay, so I was with a company last week in Cleveland. They manufacture welding equipment. I mean, the super sexy stuff, right? They have had an outreach program for 40 years, and they reach down into middle schools, and they will bring people in to see what it's like. And as a result of that, they don't have the same sorts of labor issues that a lot of other manufacturers do, because they curate that labor force. And they're a remarkable company. They also have a phenomenal sustainability program, which I'm really excited about, and they're converting their welding equipment into fast chargers. So it's probably not appropriate for me to use the name, but they are very cool, and it's one of the fun things about what we get to do in my line of work.
And I'm not restricted, so I can drop names all day long. So Train Technologies, I know Helen was supposed to be here, but she's not feeling well from Train. They do the same thing. They go in really, really early. That's why you never hear them complaining about workforce issues. I have another company that I advise in Michigan called Our Next Energy One. They basically opened up their museum to the electric vehicle for kids to come in and see. I've got a 10-year-old son. He came to work with me at New Lab one day, where we have a city ordinance that allows the testing of new mobility, which is a major feature of Detroit, obviously. My son, no childcare, so he came to work with me. He left the building. They let him goof around and play different things like VR or whatever on the front lawn. He was driving stuff. He's 10. And he left that place and he goes, "Mom, I want to come to work with you every day." So I'm like, mission accomplished. Yeah. Good job, Josh Seifman.
Well, I just saw Jesse walk in the room, so I would be remiss if I didn't point out that as part of the Tech Hub, South Florida Tech Hub process that she just convened, we had the Museum of Discovery and Science in Broward County as a core partner, in part because it's a one avenue, small that it is, of engaging a different age demographic. So I think with that, and the Frost Museum, yes, and the Frost Museum. So with that, we are out of time. Please join me in thanking our panelists.